G'day and welcome to Aussie Mike's Bees. I'm Mike Allerton and this is the very first Aussie Mike's Bees Q&A. I've had a series of questions over months and months and it's time to do something about that. It seems to come in fairly frequently, and one of the comments made is that Aussie beekeeping is different to most other parts of the world. So while there's great information out there from the United States for North America and terrific stuff out there for the UK and other parts of Europe, I'm just going to focus on Australia. There'll be an overlap, of course, and my hope is that I will just do 15-minute episodes answering 3 or 4 questions at a time, and then leave it open to you guys to put in your own comments about what I've said, right or wrong, or your opinion. So hopefully everyone will get on board with that one. So the first question, I'll have a quick look because I've forgotten already. So what are those red entrances on some of your hives? It comes from one of the regular commenters, Brett, and I think he's talking about these devices. I've got them on a series of hives at the moment, including the long lang. I've got 2 on there. Now this is called the Guardian Entrance, and the ones I bought are original stock. I know there's knockoffs. I don't know what they're like. I've never bought them, never tried them. And the way these work is that you screw them to the entrance. Now obviously this is narrower than a full width hive, so you've got to blank off or block off the original entrance, have a slot that corresponds with this point, and then you screw that. It comes with a couple of little screws that you can screw it in, and then the bees come along and they have absolutely no problem, even though this is jutting out. Or if you can imagine, let's see, if you've got a landing board, it might be sitting something like that. So you've got this gap under here, and some bees, when they're first learning to get in there, they'll crawl under, but then they'll come back out. They can easily climb up here, but beetles can't. Small hive beetle can't bend around sharp corners, so if they go in, they run into a blockage. So they'll come back out. If they try to get upside down and go around that edge, they can't and fall off. And then if they do manage to get around it, they fall through the holes. If they land on the top, it's the same thing. They try to get around there, they fall. And when I first put these on, I watched for a while and saw some beetles flying in and trying to get in, and it succeeded in stopping them getting in. So it looked good. So I trial it. I'm still mid-trial. I'm pretty slow about it. I'm just collecting information and keeping my eyes on it. It's winter now. It is the 28th of June 2023, middle of our winter, or pretty close to the middle of our winter. So there's not a lot of activity, and I'm not going to open up hives to have a look. So next spring will be, I think, when I finalize my opinion on these. But so far so good. Little thing I did do, I made the mistake of, I cut out a plastic hive reducer to then screw this to, and it did warp a little bit. That caused a little bit of a gap around the sides, and the beetles got in through there. So having experienced that, I'd use a solid chunk of wood and then screw that onto that, and I'll go through some detail on what I come up with for that in spring. But the Guardian Entrance, there is a corresponding top entrance version that's just for, I think it might be a 20 or a 25 mil, so 3/4 or inch hole that screws to so the bees can go in and out at top entrance. Now in Australia we don't tend to use top entrances, it's just not a thing, and in some states you're not allowed to use them. So I only use these bottom entrances, and that's good for me. So at this stage I haven't concluded my results, but so far so good. I'd recommend them. I think I paid about $10 each for these if you buy in quantities and from the right supplier, but I have seen them over $20 at some suppliers, so shop around if they look a bit pricey. But it is a couple of years ago. Supply might cost more now due to all the COVID rubbish we've been through. So that's question one. Right, another question is, and I want to try to keep on time for you guys to respect your time. What are the details on the router bit for the handles and router requirements? So that's going back to my beehive handle video using this arrangement, where I did a video on how to do professional looking bee box handles in the sides and ends of the bee boxes using this 2-inch cove bit that I got at the time from AliExpress, and it was really cheap. I can't even remember how much it was, under $10 Aussie, so you know, $5 American. And the problem was it's too short to go into the router and then have enough distance up there, so I combined it with an extension. So that's 50mm or 2 inches, and the extension brings it out so that it pops out of the table high enough to make the handle. Now this is just high-speed steel, and they do go dull, especially if your wood, your pine is a little bit sappy, as it can be. But I started having difficulty sourcing these. They were dropping supply, and the high-speed steel had a shorter life. You can dress them up, sharpen them up, but it was starting to have a bit of a short life, and I thought, I want tungsten. I couldn't find one, so I set about drawing it up and searching to have them made specifically out of tungsten carbide. I tried tool makers in the US and in Australia, and it was going to land up being between $400 and $550 to have one made. And so I looked elsewhere. I actually looked to India. Now I had to buy minimum quantities. I couldn't even get, at the time, prototypes, because I wanted to get a couple of prototypes to see if the concept worked first. And they said, no, you've got to do a minimum order. So I did that, bit the bullet, and thought I'll take a punt. And I'm glad I did. Now the difference is, so this is 45mm, this is 50mm, so you think it's not going to be as deep a handle, but when you take into account how much width you have in the extension bit there, you lose quite a bit. So you're only cutting the distance between the collet and the edge. But when you've got the straight shaft like that, you actually get slightly deeper. I'm not sure if you can see that, but trust me, it's deep enough for a good handle. And that's a 1/2 inch shaft, so that'll go into your standard 1/2 inch router on your router table, and that will, so you can put the fence right up very close to that shaft, and it'll do a beautiful job. Tungsten carbide stays so sharp, and you can dress them with the diamond card sharpeners that you can buy. So this shaft, now if you have a look at a standard one, this is pretty typical of the length of shaft of a standard bit. Now I'll turn it around so you can see the numbers there. So standard bit is 38mm, and I should know what that is in inches, but yeah, that's 38mm. And what we've got in this shaft is 95 or about 96mm. So what does that mean? It means that you can seat that deeply into the collet on your router, and you've got all of this above the table, so you can set the distance down from the top of the box, because you do the whole thing upside down, the box upside down, so you can set how far below that handle will be. And these are beautiful. So I put that on my website, Aussie Mike's Bees shop. Now, don't give me a hard time, it's a shocking website. I've got to spend some time sorting that out, but one day. So you can look these up there. I sell them for $60 US. That's a lot better than 400 bucks, I tell you what. Interestingly, most of them go to the US. I've sold a few in Australia, but most of you guys watching are Americans, which is great. And the postage, I send it in this little box here that came with the manufacturer, from the manufacturer, so it's nicely protected. I put it in a padded envelope and I send it off in the post, and it's quite reasonable. Jump on the website and check out what that is. Now, the gist of the question from one of the watchers, the viewers, was saying, I'm not sure if my router is up to it. Now, I'm using a a 2 horsepower table router. I used to have a 3 horsepower, but I've got a 2 horsepower now. Might be 2.5. That stacks. But what you got to remember is you need to have variable speed, because when you've got a wider cut like that, you've got to slow the motor down, because the speed of the edge is a lot higher on a wider bit. So when you've just got a straight bit, you can wind the speed up to, could be 20,000. You might have to back it off to 15,000 revs because of that width. You sort of sense the sound of it when you're doing a good bite, and you feed it in nice and slowly. You don't push too hard, and it'll just bite out a beautiful cut into your wood. So variable speed, you've got to have that to tone it off. I possibly wouldn't go less than 2 horsepower, but I guess you could try smaller and just go easier, but it's got to be able to handle a 1/2 inch shaft. So maybe the smaller horsepower machines don't have that anyway. They might drop to 1/4 by the time you're getting too small. You certainly can't do it with a trim router. Way too big for that. So I hope that answers your question about what machine, and I'll do a new video, update video on using this one, because I just can't source these anymore, and frankly I think these are safer without having to do all of that arrangement and tighten 2 lots of collets up. It's a lot more weight in there and bulk. I don't really like it anymore. This is much more elegant. So look up the shop and see how you go with that. Don't you think the Varroa response is government overreach? Oh man. There's a guy up Newcastle Way or Central Coast Way who's launching a class action lawsuit against the government because of what they're doing with the Varroa response. I think most of what he's saying is just misinformed. He's lacking knowledge. He doesn't understand the Varroa life cycle. So the reason the government's doing what they're doing, and it's not just the government, it's the whole industry. So the beekeeping industry, pollinators, honey producers, and associated industries. So the crop farmers who rely on pollination, they're all in on the program. They created the response over 10 years ago because we knew that we would get an incursion at some stage. So everyone in the industry, including the recreational beekeepers at the time, agreed to this response. and so far we're 12 months down into it at this stage. And the logic behind it is to, first of all, contain the spread, and that's what they've mostly been doing up to date. And even though there's been some recent new infested premises come out, it's still pretty close to within the containment area. And bear in mind, all of the new infested premises outbreaks in the last easily 6 or 7 months have been from illegal hive moves. It hasn't been natural spread. Science tells us how fast the spread goes because Varroa has a specific life cycle. They're 100% dependent on honeybees to reproduce, and without honeybees they die. They can only live for 5 days without bees, and once there's no bees, the Varroa dies. And this is why they're talking about containment, then eradication. So they contain the spread, they eradicate all the bees inside that zoned off area, the eradication zone, and by doing so they eliminate the host, so the Varroa within that area then dies. So obviously, what happens with feral colonies? You can't go pour petrol over them. And so that's where the baiting program is, and they're using a very common insecticide called fipronil. That comes in your dog and cat flea collars. It is in products like ant rid for getting rid of ants. But the difference here is that they're using a super tiny dose compared to those dosages. And the reason for that is they don't want the bee to die before they take the baited syrup back to the colony. And they want to minimise the risk to pollinators or any other honey eaters. So they've set up bait stations in a grid pattern. Because they don't want to cause any harm to other species, they're manned. So this is super labour intensive. They've got them approximately every 3 kilometres in a grid within the kill zone, the red zone, and they monitor the syrup first of all with warmed up honey and melted wax, beeswax to attract. Once they're seeing activity, so the scout bees are hitting it hard, they will switch it out and spike it is the word they're using. So then they switch out clean sugar syrup for fipronil baited sugar syrup, and then they sit there and watch. And once the activity starts to drop off, so what's happening is the scouts have told the foragers where this food source is, they all hammer it, and then they take it back to the colony. It gets spread through the colony, and through trophallaxis it's fed to their sisters or stored. And so over the next short period of time, the colony is eradicated. And so that works with hives that have been missed, so unregistered hives. It works with feral hives, and that's the way they're looking at eradicating every colony in the zone. Have they done it yet? No. It's winter. We're hoping like crazy they can hammer it solidly before spring. And at this stage, when you look at the map of Australia, if it's as wide as this screen, and you have a look over here on the east coast, as an American reference, it might be around the area the size of maybe Maine or something on the north east coast. It's a small state, that's all, and you've got the rest of the country still free. So every other state and territory in the country are all doing alcohol washes to make sure they don't have it yet, and it would only be from someone moving hives illegally. and so it's a tiny part of the country that's affected yet. I'm pretty sure if the US had their time again, I've talked to quite a few American beekeepers, and they said if we could have gone back and did what you guys are doing now, we'd throw everything at it, because everything changes once you're on the treatment roller coaster. So we're still trying to avoid that. We're contained, they're eradicating, the department is still confident that they can eradicate. So my fingers are crossed, and toes, all the fingers. We want success, and I'm still very much on board with it. I don't call it government overreach. This is a biosecurity emergency, and we're farmers. We're not keeping pets. We're keeping livestock, and it has a huge ramification on much more than your few hives in the backyard. I know commercial guys that have lost hundreds and hundreds of hives, and everyone that I've talked to in the red zone that have lost their hives to this eradication program are on board with it, saying don't let our sacrifice to be for nothing. Keep at it until it's eradicated, because it is worth it. So that's my opinion on that. So that's my 3 questions. I'll wind up there. Leave your comments for anything I've said. If you want more information about any of those things, or you've got your own view, by all means, make your comments. I'm not going to be able to post much over the coming weeks because I'm off to Europe with my lovely wife. A holiday this time. It's not a work trip. First of all, going to London for a few days, not doing any beekeeping there, but from there off to Slovenia. That's where my wife's father's family comes from. And even though she calls herself a bit of a bee widow, because I'm off with my other girls and I leave her quite a bit, she has organised with her family in Slovenia to go to a museum over there that is massively detailed. It's the best bee museum. So I'll be doing that, and I'll shoot some video and bring that information to you. She's also on one of the relatives' farms. They keep bees in a Slovenian bee house, an AZ bee house, hives. So I'll be looking over that, and that'll be fun. And there's also been an introduction by, I think, one of Marie's aunts, knows an academic or a bee expert, they call her, at one of the universities that specialise in bee science and beekeeping. So I'll be going there too. So that's the most exciting part of the trip for me. And then after that, we're off to Rome for a few days. I've never been there, but man, how can that match bees? I mean, Slovenia bees, come on. And then we're on board a cruise ship around the Greek islands. Now, my last Greek island trip, I visited a bee museum at the island of Rhodes, and that was great, but I didn't shoot any video. I'm not getting there this time, but I think you'll be happy with what I come back with. So look forward to bringing that to you in a future video, and to have more of these Q&A videos. This is Q&A video number 1 for Aussie Mike's Bees. I'm Mike Allerton, and thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.